We'll start first with handcuffs and the backs that you want to get yourself. I can't believe this. Alexander Mattison, 34% rostered. Going into fantasy playoffs, this should be closer to 100% because we've seen it time and time again how damn good Alexander Mattison is, whether you have Dalvin Cook or whether you just want yourself a potential top 5 running back if something happens to Dalvin Cook, who's missed at least 3 games every single year of his career. Now, this year it probably won't happen, but you never know. We still got 4 games on the year. Who knows? Maybe you get Alexander Mattison your entire playoffs. The last year, just looking at his games without Dalvin Cook, he averaged in those 4 games 22 fantasy points per game. That would have been a top 4 running back on the season. Top 10 over and over. He was a top 10 running back in 3 of his 4 starts last year. He was over 20 fantasy points in 3 of his 4 starts last year. Never went outside the double digits. So great floor, great ceiling. Alexander Mattison, far and away the number 1 handcuff in all of fantasy. The fact that he's only 34% rostered blows my mind. Make sure you go get Alexander Mattison if he's out there in your leagues, the ultimate bench stash at this point. But slowly below him, just very, very slightly. These are my only 2 tier 1 handcuffs, the guys that I am confident would be top 10 running backs if the starter ahead of them misses time. The next guy would be Khalil Herbert. He'll be coming off the IR after their bye week this week. So the risk is in week 15, you're not going to have him as a starter. We could, as early as week 15, see Madison as a starter if something happens to Cook week 14. The Bears aren't playing, so there's no real upside to Khalil Herbert this week. But stashing him now, just in case something happens to David Montgomery. We've seen him be a monster. He's got 5 starts under his belt without David Montgomery. He's averaged 17 fantasy points per game. Again, top 10 numbers last year and this year, should that be the case. He has seen 10-plus carries, Khalil Herbert, in 5 times his career, those games we just alluded to. He's been top 12 in 3 of those 5 games, 17 points per game. He'd be on pace for 1,700 rushing yards, 17,000, just smashing world records. Now, 1,710 touchdowns, though. Top 12 numbers across the board should he be the starter. Look no further for league-winning upside than when he filled in for David Montgomery in week, 3? 157 yards, 2 touchdowns, 30 fantasy points. The running back 1 that week. He's now been the running back 40, running back 11, 8, 34, and running back 1 in those games without Montgomery. He averages nearly 5 yards after contact per rush. That's the top in the NFL. Earlier this year, before he went down himself, only Nick Chubb had more runs of 10-plus yards, and Herbert had done it on 30 fewer carries than him. The guy is legitimately good. He's been top 5 in the elusive rating for PFF in back-to-back years. He's just a really nice talent. So Khalil Herbert, if anything happened to Montgomery, a nice playoff schedule. You got the Chargers and the Packers, 2 of the worst run defenses in the league. Definitely a top 10 potential guy should something ever happen to David Montgomery. Now, a lesser-owned handcuff right now, Dontrell Hilliard, only 13%. He is my number 3 handcuff. Not going to be that way on most lists, but this is why I absolutely love Hilliard should something ever happen to Derrick Henry. Look at the playoff schedule. Week 15, Chargers, 4th most points to backs. Week 16, Houston Texans, the most points to running backs. And week 17, Dallas, a tough matchup. But those 2 matchups alone make Hilliard well worth a roster spot in nearly every league, whether you have Henry or not. I know Henry's a tank, and should he stay healthy, he's going to obliterate those 2 defenses. If somehow, after these last 2 pretty paltry weeks for Derrick Henry, you still have a trade option, and you can somehow get him at any type of price, he's my number 1 running back the rest of the season, given this schedule. He's going to destroy the you already know what he does against the Texans. He averages nearly 200 yards over the last 2 years against them. But then the Chargers, a really, really bad defense against the run as well. So Henry's probably going to just smash fantasy leagues and be a league winner. But if he did end up missing time for either of those 2 games, Hilliard is definitely the next man up. This was alluded to throughout training camp. The Athletic talking about he's clearly the 2nd best running back on the roster. Good bulk of work if Henry goes down. Other reports saying he regularly made plays in camp. He was leaving no doubt he'd be the next guy, impressed while carrying a heavy workload. They have no issues feeding him. Now, last year, Henry did miss some time. They had Donta Foreman on the roster, who was the main back, and even still in those 7 games without Henry, 3 of those games, we saw Hilliard put up 16 or more fantasy points. The one game he was given the start over Foreman was against the Patriots, What did Hilliard do? 131 yards and a touchdown. Absolutely shredded them. We know he has the receiving role already on lock, so a little bit of handcuff with benefits upside, but you're probably not using. I hope to God if you're making your fantasy playoffs, you're not using Hilliard in any of those spots unless something happens to Henry. And again, I think he'd be the every down back. Dontrell Hilliard, maybe Haskins would mix in for 5 to 10 carries, but he has the clear-cut number 2 role, a very soft schedule, and all Hilliard's ever done when he gets used is impress. He's no Henry, but I think he'd put up about 80% of Henry numbers in the – everybody blasts the Texans. Everybody blasts the Chargers. You don't have to be that good to blast those guys. So those 2 matchups alone make him well worth being rostered. Love Dontrell Hilliard there. Zamir White, my number 4 handcuff of this playoff stretch run. Now, the schedule is gross. You got New England 31st. You got San Fran at the last week, the championship week, 32nd. And you got sandwiched in between them, Pittsburgh 19th. So none of those are great, juicy matchups. But this team is so committed to the run, the Raiders are right now, that I think Zamir White is a genuine talent. This one's more so, less than where we got Hilliard banking on the schedule. Zamir White, I'd be banking on the talent. One, his nickname's Zeus because of the workout warrior, the absolute freak athlete this guy is. Nobody benches, squat. I mean, freak body, freak speed. And we've seen it on some runs. Just 2 weeks ago, the guy had runs of 17 and 12 yards. Only 2 runs he had. Looked really, really solid. All year, he's been over 4.5 yards per carry on his usage so far in the season. It's just been very minimal because Josh Jacobs is literally the fantasy MVP. He's a monster. But every single week, Josh Jacobs is on the injury report with a calf, hamstring, something. Monster workloads all year. There's a chance he breaks down. There's also a chance with them not picking up his 5th-year option, Jacobs is just kind of like, screw you guys. I got a little thing going on. I'm going to sit this one out. I don't think he's that type of guy. I think he knows he's in part of a special season here, and he's going to keep gutting it out, whatever the injuries report or not, whatever they say. I don't think he's going to just sit to sit. But that's a possibility. And even if not, what if these lingering injuries finally do catch up with him? So Zamir White, just a really solid talent, even with a tough schedule, I think would have genuine top 20 upside anytime out there. But based on schedule and potential usage, I might even like Josh Kelley, my number 5 handcuff, even more than him. We saw, look no further than last year, how valuable the number 2 running back for the Chargers can be. Justin Jackson saw 72% of the snaps, 19 touches, 162 yards, 9 targets, 8 catches, 2 touchdowns, 34.2 fantasy points in week 16. The running back 1 in your fantasy playoffs. That's the stuff fantasy wet dreams are made of, folks. Josh Kelley has been the clear-cut number 2 guy whenever healthy. Look no further than this last week. No one else touched the field at running back other than Xander Horvath, the fullback. Other than that, we saw 46 snaps for Austin Eckler, 31 for Josh Kelley. And before getting hurt for about a month, he was already the clear-cut number 2 guy for Austin Eckler. In fact, this is almost like a 60-40 split without an injury happening. So should something devastating happen to the best player in fantasy right now, Austin Eckler, I think Josh Kelley would walk right into a 20 to 30-point upside type of role. I don't think Kelley's anything that special, but he has looked a lot better this year than what his plodding ass looked like the first couple years. He is a definitely capable receiver too. No, he wouldn't be Austin Eckler, but the schedule is not bad down the stretch, and he'd be stepping into a role that we saw produce the number 1 running back in fantasy, and they didn't just let go because they believed in Josh Kelley more. They didn't even go to re-sign Justin Jackson. So if Justin Jackson can put up 30 points in this offense, I think Josh Kelley sure could too. So he should definitely be on all rosters. I have Eckler in a bunch of leagues, and I'm making sure to have Josh Kelley as a handcuff anywhere I have Eckler. So I've got 2 more guys I really want to highlight and a couple rapid-fire quick names, and then we'll chat some defenses and on to all of your questions, Wolfpack. Jordan Mason. This is like the tier 2 of handcuffs with him, Hilliard, Zamir White, and Kelley. I like all these guys a lot, though, especially Mason. 8 carries, 51 yards, really explosive guy. Crushed it in the preseason, averaging nearly 7 yards a pop there. And that's the reason he made this team over some of the higher, Trey Sermon, 2nd-round pick. See ya. Doesn't matter because Jordan Mason was that much more explosive. Now, of course, McCaffrey, over 82% of the snaps this last week, going to likely see the vast majority of the work here down the stretch. I don't think Mason has much standalone value. Well, again, 51 yards this last week. He's got some nice zip to him. But so something happened to CMC. We all know how risky CMC has been these last few years. Workhorse right now, staying healthy. Prayers up. I hope he does. I have an Eckler CMC team. Love it. But if he goes down, it seems like Jordan Mason. We didn't see Tyrion Davis play a single snap. Tevin Coleman hadn't been activated. I think those guys would get involved if CMC missed time, but it seems like Jordan Mason has clearly taken over as the number 2 guy here. And in the fantasy playoffs, Seattle, second most points to backs. Washington, not a great matchup, 29th in week 16. And week 17, the Raiders, 6th most points to backs. So 2 top 6 matchups in your fantasy playoffs. That's why Christian McCaffrey could go nuclear. But if something happens, if devastation strikes, Jordan Mason would be a quality running back too in those 2 great matchups. And even against Washington, he's got good pass catching chops. I like Jordan Mason a lot. The last guy to highlight here is Jaylen Warren. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, he might have been number 2 on this list, number 3. I love the player. In all efficiency metrics, whether it's as a receiving back or rushing back, he's top 15. Yards per route run, yards after contact, whatever it is you want to go with, he is significantly outpacing Najee Harris, who has looked better these last couple of weeks. I'll give it to him. Steel plates out. He does look better. All that to say, though, I love the player that Jaylen Warren is. The issue I have, and the reason he's not higher, despite the fact I think he has a true 3-down skill set, could be that Tomlin workhorse, is Benny Snell has to just get his ugly ass involved. After he had a good spot fill-in duty when Najee Harris had to leave against the Colts the other week, Benny Snell looks solid, and now you look at this backfield. 44 snaps with the Harris, nearly 70%. He's become the guy again. We do have Warren in that clear 3-down role, a 3rd down role rather. 9 targets 9 routes, only 1 target, but nearly lockstep with Najee Harris on the route running. But Benny Snell mixing in for 9 snaps, mixing in for 6 carries, just 1 for Jaylen Warren. So all this to say, if something does happen to Najee, I think it would end up becoming Benny Snell actually getting the carries here. 15-ish carries, maybe 5 to 6 trickle down to Warren, who would then get the receiving role. But the real value would have been a 3-down monster, which, again, I think he deserves. If we knew that was going to happen, he'd be right up to number 2 or 3 on this list. But I think Benny Snell's ugly ass is going to be involved too much for me to put Warren any higher than 7th on this list. Now, just to rip through a couple fast names here, JaMychal Hasty, also worthy, especially if you have Etienne on your roster, 18% out there. Remember, last time you had to fill in for Etienne, 12 carries, 28. And the big thing, 5 catches, 67, and a touchdown. He just makes really big plays. He's got decent speed, really good shiftiness, breaks a lot of tackles. I really like this JaMychal Hasty kid. I also like Deion Jackson, 8% rostered. His 1 start this year, he was the running back 1. He had 2 starts, rather. He got hurt in the other one, though. Got hurt in both of them. So that's the risk here with Deion Jackson. But let's not forget 12 carries, 42 yards, and a touchdown. In addition to the big thing, 10 targets and 10 catches for 79 yards. He was the running back 1 through 3 quarters of action in that game. So a lot of upside of Deion Jackson. The easiest playoff schedule among all teams for the Colts for running backs. So yeah, Jonathan Taylor should probably go ballistic here down the stretch. But if something happened, Deion Jackson would be walking into a very tasty schedule. Just thinking about that, actually, maybe he belongs over Jaylen Warren. We just talked about would probably be in a committee. I think Deion Jackson would have this largely to himself. Jordan Wilkins maybe mixes it all a little bit. But I like Deion Jackson. Matt Breida behind, we've seen this. Just a few years ago, he was number 3 in the league in rushing for the first half of the year for the 49ers. Remember that? Like 5 years ago or so? Breida's got some explosiveness. When he's gotten the ball this year, he's got a couple touchdowns. I mean, I like Breida. I like the player. Should something happen to Barkley, who we know has had injury concerns in the past, Breida would be a 3-down back. They truly have no one else. Was it Gary Brightwell? No. It'd be a Matt Breida show with a pretty ugly schedule, but I like Breida. Again, I look for my handcuffs. Guys that could be genuine 3-down backs for the volume if something happens to the starter. So look for Breida. Look for Boone. Latavius Murray's been gross anyway, so maybe Boone just takes over at some point. 5% rostered, he could be an option. And you see Ingram on there. I'm not talking Mark Ingram, who got hurt on Monday Night Football. I'm talking Keontae Ingram, playing behind James Conner. We know one of the more injury-prone backs in the league. He's already missed time, and we saw Benjamin finish as a top 12 running back in half of his starts this year already. So I think we could see that for Keontae Ingram as well, 3-down guy. He got outshined, obviously, by Bijan Robinson at Texas. But Ingram himself was a solid talent, good churner, nothing special, but can do it all. And so if Connor missed some time, I think he's truly the only man up at this point. So definitely look for Keontae Ingram as well. That Wolfpack wraps up my handcuff discussion, all the guys to look for. Hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that gives you some guys to look for. And again, I would pick up pretty much any of those guys. It's a pretty weak waiver wire in general, other than those 3 top-heavy backs at the top being Zonovan Knight, being, again, Cam Akers, and as well as James Cook. Love those 3 guys at the top. But other than that, especially if there's a Mattison, Khalil Herbert, even Hilliard out there, all deserve roster spots above a lot of the guys I talked about if you don't need a bye week plug-in for, again, a crazy bye week here. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.